Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the audio version of this. I'm going to be using a program called Speechify to read this PDF aloud. However, the PDF is imperfect, so I'll have to do a little clicking, and I'll also interject some of my thoughts occasionally. The Speechify voice is based on President Barack Obama's speeches. I realize that there's a political connection here, so I apologize, but he really does have an incredible reading voice, so I hope you enjoy. I've set it to read at about 230 words per minute, but if you find that too fast or too slow, feel free to change the speed using the YouTube settings at the bottom. They should be right here in the corner. All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen.
What is oral assessment? Oral assessment refers to any assessment of student learning that is conducted by the spoken word. Many modes of communication can be used in assessment. Writing is no doubt the most common, with essays, tutorial papers, laboratory reports, and written examinations dominating traditional assessment. Online text communication may be a significant recent variation on the written mode. Some assessment, especially in areas such as the creative arts, relies on the direct observation of a student's performance or other creative work. Oral assessment stands in contrast to these modes of assessment, though often supplementing them. Assessment can be exclusively oral, or, as is frequently the case, can be combined with other modes of communication, depending on the nature of the assessment task. What makes the assessment oral is that at least part of the assessment, and part of what counts towards a student's mark or grade, depends on what the student communicates by word of mouth. Of course, it is not only the student who speaks. Oral assessment may involve an assessor or assessors posing questions orally, with varying degrees of spoken interaction as the assessment proceeds. Moreover, others may be involved in the assessment. The nursing student interviewing a patient, while his or her preceptor looks on, the law student mooting in front of a barrister in the role of a judge, or peers who are responding to a seminar presentation.
So I want to pause. Obviously, this is not the sort of thing we see our students doing a lot. The point is that it can be very tied to profession. This is often used in universities, and so this is very university focused, so I'll be adding a couple of notes along the way for our specific context. So here we go.
Oral assessment includes a wide range of types. Most academics are familiar with the doctoral viva, which for many epitomizes oral assessment, but there are many other forms, including send presentations, including the in-class presentation on a prepared topic and the group project report to the class, on interrogations, including the viva within undergraduate or graduate coursework, in which the student is quizzed by one or more examiners, and the short interview of students to confirm their authorship of a written paper, and in applications such as the OSCE, Objective Structured Clinical Examination, in nursing or medicine, where the student moves from one simulated patient to another and is questioned about diagnoses and recommended action. One form of oral assessment not included in this guide is the assessment of language skills, whether in the context of learning a foreign language or as part of the development of oral communication competencies. This guide is not concerned with the use of oral assessment to gauge students' language or communication skills per se. Its focus is on the use of oral processes to judge knowledge, understanding, problem solving, and other abilities through the oral medium, not mastery of the oral medium itself.
So just to clarify, and we'll touch on this again, we are not grading their public speaking skills. We're grading using the criteria for every single course in the MYPIB. So let's continue.
Why assess orally? There are many reasons for choosing to assess our students orally. Here are 7 commonly used reasons for opting for oral assessment, either on its own or in combination with other modes of assessment. Assessment can be used to assess 7 reasons for using oral assessment. 1, the learning outcomes demanded. 2, it allows probing of the student's knowledge. 3, it reflects the world of practice. 4, it improves learning. 5, it suits some students. 6, the meaning of questions can be clarified. 7, it helps to ensure academic integrity. 1, it is the best way to assess particular learning outcomes or abilities. While oral assessment can be applied to almost any kind of learning outcome, it seems to be particularly useful in relation to students' applied problem-solving abilities, where they need to apply what they know to more or less complex scenarios. In such contexts, oral assessment can provide insight into students' cognitive processes, where the assessment involves students interacting with others, including with real or role-playing clients or patients. The assessment also allows judgments about students' interpersonal competence, with or without clients. Assessment can be used to assess intrapersonal qualities, such as confidence, self-awareness, and aspects of professionalism that may not be evidenced in other modes of assessment. 7 reasons for using 2. It allows probing of the depth and extent of students' knowledge. One of the most important characteristics of most forms of oral assessment is that follow-up questions can be used to determine the limits of what the student knows. Unlike a written exam, assessors can ask the student to elaborate on an answer and can use a series of carefully graduated questions or probes until they have reached the limit of what the student knows. Assessors often express surprise at how well their students perform in oral assessments. It may be that oral assessment can be particularly good for probing the upper limits of a student's knowledge, though it may also be that students often prepare better for this kind of assessment. 3. It reflects the world of practice. Practice includes both the fields of professional practice, such as law, teaching, or nursing, for which our students are preparing, as well as less clearly defined fields of work for which their university studies are preparing them. Most fields of practice are dominated by talking rather than writing, listening and responding as a client discusses his or her needs, explaining a course of treatment to a patient, teaching a class of students. Such talk tends to be embodied, incorporating knowledge, skills, feelings, and beliefs in action, so that assessment facilitates judgments about the student's integrated learning. Being able to speak intelligently about economics is as important as being able to write about it. In fact, speaking ability may be more useful for students because they are more likely to have to speak about economic issues than write about them. Wallstad, 2001, p. 286. 4. It improves the quality of student learning. Oral assessment can promote learning in several ways, and students who anticipate being asked questions that they cannot predict conclude that the best way to handle this situation is to develop a thorough understanding of what they are studying. And students may prepare particularly thoroughly in order to avoid seeming foolish in front of their examiner or their peers. Some students seem reluctant to voice ideas that they do not own. That is, they want to ensure that they have a genuine understanding of what they are saying. You prepare yourself better because you've got the added stress of like you're in front of someone. So because you know you've got to do that, you try to make sure. You're not just sitting in an exam room anonymously. Law student, Joffin, 1999, p. 153. 5. It suits some students. Some students may be better able to express themselves orally than in writing, while others may have particular difficulties with writing owing to dyslexia, impaired vision, or other factors.
I want to pause here and point something out. Interactive oral assessments are not an inclusion strategy. So we're not giving this just to some students and not to others. That said, I think sometimes we take for granted that written tests, whether it's multiple choice or an essay, I think we take for granted that they're fair because we're so used to them. But then when we come to something new, like interactive oral assessment, we might say, like, that's not fair. Like, not everybody is as nimble or as clearly expressed. I want to point out that in both of those assessment scenarios, in the written assessment and the interactive oral assessment, it is going to suit some students better than others. And that's the point this sentence just made. A student with a dyslexia or a student who doesn't do a lot of reading obviously would like them to overcome these difficulties, but regardless, a written test doesn't suit them well. It does suit students well who naturally enjoy reading or who have the luck of being born without any of those impairments. IOA does the same. It suits students who do a lot of talking. It helps students with the dyslexia. So these are just two assessment types. And I want to be careful, just because we're more used to written assessments doesn't make them more valid. And an assessment suiting some students or another isn't a negative of the assessment necessarily. I would say it's inherent. Every assessment suits some students better than others. So we want to be careful as we talk to parents and students to make it very clear that although, yes, IOAs do suit some students better than others, every assessment suits some students better than others. I would say, in a sense, IOAs are actually a little bit more fair because they make sure that the assessment type is not so uniform that it's always suiting the same students more than others. So by mixing it up, we make sure that every student gets a chance at an assessment type that suits them well. So here we go, we're continuing.
Yet other students may have a particular wish or need to develop their ability to communicate about their discipline orally. knowing that this will be a benefit to them when they enter the workforce.
So again, I'm going to pause here. One of the things I heard from my students a lot is like, I'm just not great at thinking on my feet. I'd much rather write. And I hear that, and there's some opportunities to accommodate that, but learning to speak clearly is as important a skill as learning to write clearly. So anytime a student expresses that to me, that like, I'm just not a good speaker, I'll do much better if I write, I like to push back and say, like, I understand that, which is one of the reasons we're doing interactive oral assessments, so that you get the opportunity to develop your speaking as well as your writing. And that's also been a huge encouragement for my students who do a lot more speaking than they do reading and writing. They get the affirmation that the skill they've developed, and some of them well developed, is a worthwhile skill, and they should be proud of that. So I just wanted to offer my thoughts there. Here we go.
6. Unclear or ambiguous questions can be re-expressed or immediately clarified. Written examinations are based on an assumption that the written word is unambiguous and readily understood in the way it was intended by all students. This may often not be the case. Oral assessment provides the opportunity to ensure that each student understands the questions being asked.
So this is another pro of interactive oral assessment. Essentially, it has built-in differentiation and built-in student support during assessment. You can always clarify and make sure they understand this question. And if they start answering something that wasn't the question, you have a chance to redirect them, which is huge. This is one of the reasons students tend to do better on interactive oral assessment. Here we go, last one, number 7.
7. It guarantees the work is the student's own. When students are not able to rely on written work, or when they are subjected to questions and probing of their understanding, they must rely on their own work and their own words, thereby reducing the likelihood of plagiarism.
And I would add to that, this guide was written before the age of AI, but I would say it guarantees the work is the student's own and not the result of AI. So if you start to listen to an interactive oral examination, it sounds like they're rotely repeating something. It can be hard to tell if it's something they wrote or something AI wrote for them. So at that point, we can pause and start asking a couple of clarifying questions, and that usually breaks them out of the recitation mode. I would also say that because it guarantees the work is the student's own and not something that AI has prepared for them to just copy, paste, and turn into you, it also makes AI a learning tool rather than a learning tool rather than a replacement for learning. Students can spend all day on AI preparing for their interactive oral examination or interactive oral assessment. That makes AI their study partner, and that's totally fine with me. If they have the question and the thoughts ahead of time and they want to spend the time thinking it through with AI, I don't care at all. It's still going to be based on what they know and understand when it comes time to be orally assessed. So with that in mind, though, we are going to talk about some disadvantages of oral assessment. So here we go. Oh, and just so you know, whenever you see these blacked out parts, I've removed things that I think would be confusing to us in the 6th through 10th grade context or just in the high school context in general. So when you see these, it's not like it was spicy or incorrect. It just doesn't relate to us very well. So here we go.
Some disadvantages of oral assessment. Undue anxiety. Some anxiety can be beneficial in oral assessment, but anxiety that interferes with a student's performance will not give a true indication of his or her ability. Anxiety may be a special impediment for students with particular mental health problems. Practicing presentations in class and providing rehearsals for vivas may help. Sometimes a student who experiences undue anxiety may need to be accommodated through alternative arrangements for their assessment.
So I want to add in here, on formative interactive oral assessments, I encourage every student, and I would say even require every student, to give an oral response. I don't offer them a written response when it's formative. When it's and that's because they can just do it again. When it comes to summatives, I take one of two tacts because we don't want their grade to be based on anxiety. So either I offer them the opportunity to write and turn that in instead of being orally assessed, or I offer them this one I'm a little careful how I communicate to students, but sometimes I offer them the opportunity to be assessed a second time and for that to be included in their assessment. Now, I only offer that second oral assessment option in a summative when there's multiple questions that the student might be asked and they don't know which one they're going to get. So that would just be, you get to answer a second question and I consider both together to determine your grade. If it's not something that has multiple questions and the student's prepared for a number of them but doesn't know which one they're going to be asked, or multiple scenarios, in that case, I would offer them the written option. And we'll talk in class a little bit about what that might look like. So there are some options, but we do want to make sure that anxiety is not affecting their grade significantly. Here we go.
Hearing or speech difficulties. Students with hearing or speech impairments may also require some adjustment to the assessment process. Time. Oral assessment can be time-consuming, which becomes particularly problematic with LAR-ER classes.
No idea what happened there, but this is basically saying oral assessment can be time-consuming. And if we were doing this like they do it in college, I would agree. However, all of the interactive oral assessments that we're going to be focusing on are going to be much shorter because, truthfully, that is more developmentally appropriate for our age group from, say, 10 to 18. These long vivas, maybe it's something they'll prepare for in DP, and they will prepare. In fact, we're helping them get ready for these kind of oral assessments by doing this in MYP. But we're never going to give them 15-minute back and forth oral assessments. Maybe language acquisition will work on that, or maybe English has some opportunities where they're actually assessing their public speaking skills. But for most of us, we're just looking for them to demonstrate their mastery on a particular criteria. And I would say that should always be in 5 minutes or less for each student. So here we go. These will not be super time consuming. In fact, it is our goal to avoid them being time consuming.
Anonymity. Examiners inevitably know whom they are examining. Unbiased. Concerns are sometimes expressed that examiners may be influenced by students' dress, gender, ethnicity, or educational background. Novelty. The form of oral assessment being used may be unfamiliar to the student.
I want to pause here. Lack of anonymity and bias become a pretty big issue for us in IOAs, and I would say that the antidote to both of these is rubrics. If you have a strong rubric, then the lack of anonymity should not lead to a lot of bias. And we'll talk more about that in a later page.
What is special about oral assessment?
Before we do that, we actually have a couple more disadvantages to talk about. Sorry, this PDF's jumping around a little bit.
Many universities and good practice require us to keep a record of the assessment for future reference in case of appeal. Making and storing audio or video recordings can be difficult to arrange.
So luckily we all have iPads and MacBooks, and we can arrange this pretty easily. I will say, for this first round of interactive oral assessments, I would like us to be recording the audio so that we can validate the scoring and so that we have something to look back on if we ever need to talk to a student about a score.
And said, articulateness versus knowledge. Examiners can mistake a student's articulateness for knowledge.
Again, this is where a strong rubric comes in. If they're not hitting the pieces of knowledge you're expecting to hear on your rubric, then it doesn't matter how articulate they are, the rubric will solve for that.
Any well-planned examination is costly in terms of examiners' time and effort. The challenge is finding assessment instruments where the effort spent is educationally profitable. Davis and Karunatilaki, 2005, P294.
I would say in our context, the reason we would bother with IOAs is that the extra planning time ends up paying dividends in grading time. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about feedback conferences. But yeah, these are absolutely going to take more time to plan, but they take so much less time to grade that I found it to be a positive trade in my classroom.